everybody. We're going to be talking about cyber cabs today from Elon Musk, followed by, well, just what is going on with women in STEM and how come we don't have enough of them in this business. And then finally, we're going to revisit DevSecOps once again because there was a whole all-day DevOps event that kind of got into this. And boy, there sure are a lot of vulnerabilities in our software these days. You're watching Techstrong, gang. We'll be back in a minute. All right, folks, here's the gang once again. I'm going to make some introductions, but of course, we have some faces that we maybe have not seen in a little while. We'll start with Tracy Bannon. How are you, Tracy?
Oh, I am doing really well. Just right.
Excellent. Nothing like as I understand it, you just got off a flight around midnight. So thanks for coming.
I did. So I may be a little punchy today, but who knows? I might add to the double trouble of the two Tracys.
All right. Speaking of the two Tracys, we have Tracy Ragan joining us once again from the Southwest. How you doing, Tracy?
I'm doing great. How about you? And I'm glad that Tracy Bannon's on. It's fun to have two women. And sometimes people confuse us. So now people can see that there's two different Tracys.
There you go. Some people might say why it's double trouble, but we'll see how it goes. All right. Then we have John Willis, who's joining us once again. John, are you home or where are you these days?
I am actually home right now. So, yeah.
Excellent. That's a rare moment for you as well, I think. So
it's a rare moment. Yeah.
And then finally, John Schwartz is once again out in Silicon Valley. And we're going to start with John because he was monitoring this whole cybercab launch from Elon Musk and his squad. And I guess they unveiled something that looked like a car, but it didn't. From the article, it didn't sound to me like it was actually operational. But John, jump in. And what did
you're very perceptive, Mike. This was a very strange press conference. First of all, it started at 7 p.m. on the West Coast, and it was at a backlot in Hollywood. So that kind of set me to, okay, these are private roads that only these cars can travel on in a very, very planned design. So first of all, they started with something from, I don't remember 2001 Space Odyssey, the Stargate sequence, that kind of psychedelic trip outs. They're going through a time continuum. They did that for the first 45 minutes of this event. So at first I thought there was a technical glitch, this being on X. It turns out this was the preamble for a very short presentation, which was kind of telling in a certain way. So they brought out this cab. Basically, the cab picked up Elon Musk, traveled maybe several hundred feet, dropped him off at the event. He described it as something with, there's no steering wheel, two front seats, there's a butterfly wing doors, inductive charging, and full service driving assistance software. So he introduces, people are screaming at him, asking him, how much does it cost? When is it available? He, in a sense, this is not prepared. These remarks are not prepared. He's basically kind of winging it. And he says, well, it's going to be cost less than $30,000 and in most likelihood, it'll be available in 2026, if not 2027. He then goes on to show something, which is it's a huge van. It's a robo van, which seats up to 20 people or can haul cargo. There's no time frame on that. Then he shows the robots. They're humanoid robots, and it's basically a guy in a suit, right? So that we go through all this. Then I checked the stock price the next morning, and it's down 6% immediately because the time frame is off. We've been hearing about this for a decade. It was very interesting. I will give him his props. This was almost a kind of futuristic type of press conference, very, very light on substance. It's almost like an Apple event where it reeled out of control. I mean, that's what the intent was. But in the end, it was some pretty interesting things, very vaguely presented, and it will spur a lot of controversy, a lot of talk, but, it makes life interesting, I guess.
Geez, no Michael J. Fox and a DeLorean and Back to the Future, none of that.
It looked like a DeLorean, by the way. And, by the way, the other thing is this was at night, so it was very dimly lit, so you couldn't really see the car that well. And I'm not sure if that was by design, but maybe to hide some sort of flaws or something, but it's almost, I don't know. I'm not going to go there. I was going to say something. It kind of reminded me of like kind of a bait and switch type of political stump speech, but there were some elements of that. But then again, it's Elon Musk.
I have a
He did
question.
call
though.
himself Dark MAGA recently, so maybe that's the reason why he
No,
did it.
Yeah.
Let's
You read my
let's
mind.
steer away from that. Let's steer away from that. But
Yeah.
let me ask you a question. Just thinking about it broadly, right now, don't we need somebody who is just thinking crazy good thoughts?
Yes.
Right. Think about
Yes.
generative AI, and people say it has hallucinations, and that's actually a feature, right? It has this vivid imagination. You got to throw a lot of stuff away. Don't we need
Yes.
somebody just talking about stuff, putting things out there? Like I'm not an Elon hater, because I do like that he comes up with, he and his people come up with
You
some
make a very
pretty awesome ideas.
Yeah, Tracy, I'm just going to just interject this one thing. That's a very, very good idea. And that's funny that you say that, because I used to go to all the Apple events when Jobs would make the presentation. Now, there's a difference between Jobs and Musk, but in a sense, they're showmen. They're opening your minds to different things. They in Musk's case, it can be polarizing. But one thing I noticed when he came on the scene, there was a lot of resentment towards him, especially from Apple. People at Apple really resented him. And I thought because he kind of took the mantle. And whatever you think about him personally, this guy does have a vision and he thinks big. And when I was watching this, I was thinking, there's no other tech events that I go to or have seen that even come close to this in terms of at least stirring your imagination.
Well, remember when he sent the car into orbit?
Well,
Right? Just think about the showmanship and the fun of that. Like I wanted to watch that just because it was interesting.
there's a dichotomy on that man, right? And I'll just say this right now. We don't have to go further. I despise him. But I got a tour of SpaceX. And one of the things they do when they give you the SpaceX tour is they show you 3 different worlds, right? They show you the Earth. Then they show you Mars. And then they show you this weird version of a planet. And it's like his vision is to actually have people living on Mars, right? Like that is the sort of the true north of that company, is to get the first human to Mars, right? It's that kind of thinking. And even the OpenAI debate of whether the lawsuit is, his version of the lawsuit is that they sold the IP, or they took the investment from Microsoft, the $1 billion original Microsoft, into OpenAI, with the caveat, unfortunately, I can't understand how billionaires can't find legal documents, but with the caveat is that when it went to AGI, which is another whole, what is AGI? But if you believe that narrative, and even though I dislike him, I actually believe that narrative that that he accepted the ability to close the model and the caveat, because the original, and I'll shut up in a second, the original intent was for OpenAI is there was a group of people, Elon Musk and others, that didn't believe, that felt that the world would be harmed if Google sort of owned AI. And
if any one organization owned AI, right? That's what we're trying to get after. Is there should be no singularity
with Larry Page and surgery and all that they were scared.
So John Schwartz, do you believe or buy into this conversation? And I think Tracy was kind of alluding to, but is Elon Musk the Thomas Edison of our times?
He may be. That is a good question. It's very debatable. The other I was going to mention, and John kind of spurred my thinking about this. I wasn't thinking about this before John was just talking, was in the last several years, there are only about 3 individuals who I've seen these types of visions from or heard things like. So there's Musk. And I remember in a couple of interviews, I did an interview with Steve Wozniak where I talked to him about the future. And one of the things he envisioned was these kind of dome-like facilities that out in the desert, where these cities would exist out in the desert and be self-sufficient, almost like a large-scale or smaller-scale version of a Phoenix or Las Vegas, but under a dome. And I remember Peter Thiel talking to him when he first had that weird idea of the underwater, Atlantis-type environments. So it's Silicon Valley's become, and there's no real big ideas. There's no Hoover Dam project. There's no moonshot. There hasn't been, except for some of these individuals, especially Musk. And I think that's been one of the big criticisms, is like everything here is based on iterations or convenience, or here's an app that does something for you while you're running an errand. And I think we've kind of got stuck into that rut. And I think we really do need big thinkers. They can aim for the sky. They can aim for Mars. If they fall short, at least they made an attempt. And what they end up doing is something that will benefit us and maybe benefit society in the long term. Who knows?
And, and
it's true. We do need big thinkers, but
you don't have to like somebody. You don't have to like them.
I get
for
that.
them to be a big thinker.
I bought a Tesla. Right? I love the car. Beautiful car. One of the best cars I ever drove. And I've had a Porsche and I've had a Mercedes. But it had the very worst customer service I have ever seen in an auto company. At one point, it took me 6 months to get my car back from being fixed, and I had to spend the money, which cost me $1,200, to ship it to Denver. And this is when Elon Musk was running the company. So I despise him because he sucks at customer service. He sucks at customer service.
I think for him, that's almost an afterthought.
Anywhere near that.
Well, yeah.
I'm not going to do one of his cars. I'm not going to do anything with him, but I'm off of X permanently.
He ruined X, but among other things. But in a sense, I don't think for somebody like him, I think customer service is almost like a kind of a nuisance, right? It's all about the idea.
It was a nuisance. How dare I tell them the car broke and I needed service, even if I'm willing to pay for it?
Right.
How dare I say that?
Well, that's the arrogance. A secondary consideration anyway, so don't worry about it. That's probably
I am glad that this is an opinion show and not a news show.
Well, the news was Tracy didn't get her car fixed for 6 months, and I was spending quite a bit every month to pay for that car.
Oh, we are hoot. Yeah, tracking back to where John was going at the very beginning.
Let's let Willis get it.
I was going to quickly say the under the radar big thinker that gets very little credit these days is Bill Gates. Because the amount of money he's putting into solving some real world problems in other parts of the world that we don't get to see that often. So anyway, there's some. I agree everything you said, John. But
I think you're right, John. That's a really good point because he doesn't pursue. I think to his credit, to Gates's credit, he doesn't pursue the publicity for a lot of the things he works on. And you know what? All props to him for doing that.
A lot of big thinkers don't pursue the publicity and are solving big problems. And it just happens to be he's in the tech industry. He likes the attention. He likes the crazy presentations and I feel like it's more than that than anything else, right?
Yeah.
After my Tesla experience, I'm just like, oh God.
Tracy, I had a friend who was an investor in Tesla. This is years ago. And this is when they were having the autopilot issues. She was actually in an accident. She was traveling from Los Angeles to San Francisco on a freeway, and it didn't break. And this started you talk about customer service, but you talk about flaws. So there is a downside, but in a sense, and I was also going to say that the 45-minute sequence, which never ended, by the way, it was just this psychedelic show. It almost, to me, seemed like it was like kind of going inside his mind, right? It was like, so it was beautiful yet disturbing at the same time. And when I think of this guy, and there's that dichotomy that we discussed earlier, you have to separate the ideas from the personality because the ideas are really interesting. The personality leaves much to be desired.
All right. I'm going to say the last thing on this because we got to move on to our next topic. But the one thing that was in your story that kind of screamed out, this is smoke and mirrors is, he's saying that the other self-driving cars are based on LiDAR and he's going to be using computer vision AI. Well, we already have computer vision AI. So it sounded to me like he was just waiting for enough hardware to drive the algorithms that are going to deliver at enough capability to make the car go reliably somewhere in 2 years. Well, God bless, but anybody can come to that same conclusion. And I don't need a light show and a psychedelic show and all this other crap to because if we've been following anything around the computer vision AI stuff, John, everybody's saying the same thing.
Well, it was interesting. I just did. I've been really trying to promote my Deming book. By the way, I have a Deming book. Now, in the Lean conferences, so I went to a conference that was based in Columbus, Indiana, and we visited a Toyota forklift factory. And what was interesting, they were bragging about the next gen forklifts are not going to use LiDAR. And they're basically using sensors. And they're finding like all these, particularly in material handling, like the complexity, the LiDAR is over expensive. You've got to have a distributed sort of system. There's just so many sort of heavyweight things with LiDAR. We think of like with autonomous vehicle. By the way, they're not really good at boxes and obstacles and colors. LiDAR. And so it was just interesting to see. I don't know if this is a trend or not, but just hearing this first time about what you were talking about was sort of Tesla. But they were very proud of the fact of how much money, how much more efficiency, and just sort of with the computing power, the computer vision power of just sensors and cameras. They felt that it's sort of the future of factory and material handling. Even picking out a particular box. And again, I'm no expert here, but LiDAR was supposedly, would do really good with people and cars, things like that. But like, how do you sort of go up into a shelf in the fourth corner quadrant, pull out the smaller box versus the bigger box, or the brown box or the black box? According to the engineers, we got a great overview of their preview of next-gen technology for forklifts, which would seem like a terribly boring subject, but it was actually fascinating. Anyway, it was when you asked me about that, Mike, I was like, yeah, I think I would normally not have a lot to talk about.
All right, folks, that's where we are. I think the one thing we can agree on is that Elon Musk is a fabulous showman. We'll be right back.
In a world where every line of code powers the future, every keystroke can introduce new threats. As software evolves, so must security. It's time to rethink how we protect our digital world. Join the leaders in DevSecOps and AI at the OpenText DevSecOps Virtual Summit on September 24th. Discover how innovation is transforming software delivery, faster, more secure, and smarter. From AI-driven security to the truth behind cloud security, get the insights that will keep you ahead of the curve. Don't just watch the future unfold. Be part of it. Register now and secure your place in tomorrow's world.
All right, folks, we're back, and the annual MetLife study on women in STEM is out once again, and has once again found that there's issues here that we're just not addressing. And I kind of feel like there's two parts of this conversation, and I'm going to dare to say these things, and then Tracy will probably set me straight. But it seems like one is we have an education issue, and we need to go deal with that at the grammar school level because we're not getting enough women into the STEM sciences early enough. But at the same time, we can't wait 20 years to solve this problem, so nobody seems to have a good answer for what to do in the meantime. But Tracy Ragan, you have a show that kind of touches on some of these issues with Techstrong TV. So what was your take on this?
Not surprising. I do believe that there are some interesting insights in that article, and in particular, the interest in younger women in STEM. But it's not; those numbers are just still not high enough. Yes, Jody Ashley and I do Techstrong Women. So happy to be doing that program. And we've had some really interesting discussions on this topic, even though we try to stick with technical topics, because most women really don't want to talk about this. But we did have Paula Ratliff on in one of our shows. She used to be one of the high-level execs at Manpower, and she talked a lot about how difficult it is for younger women to become interested in STEM. Now, when we think about STEM, a lot of women go into medicine. There is increase in biotech and women getting funded in these areas and women in leadership positions, but not necessarily in all of STEM. Technology, we struggle horribly. And Paula, talked about the effects COVID had on women in technology in particular. And she told us that they lost a huge number of women because they had to stay home and make sure the kids were going to school. And it was COVID. They had kids at home. They couldn't do both jobs. So we have a long way to go in this area. And I just want to say something about, and it will probably be controversial, but I want to say something about D&I in companies today. It is a checkbox. That's all companies are doing. It's a checkbox. If we go look at Palo Alto Networks, they had a huge program in D&I, yet they still stuck lampshades on two women in Las Vegas. So we have a problem. And part of the problem, and this is the other problem that I know, is that oftentimes women who have done well in technology, in any of these areas, in business in general, believe that between two women, it's a zero-sum game. It's not. I have been in situations where the worst manager I ever had was a woman. So women, we ourselves have to realize that mentorship programs are really critical. We need to be reaching down to younger women and reaching for their hand and pulling them up. And that this is not a zero-sum game. We can both win. Even if it's a room full of men and there's only two women in the room, we're not competing against each other. And oftentimes that happens. So there's a lot of cultural problems that go along with this particular topic. Some of it come from women ourselves. And we have to look at ourselves and figure out how to solve the problem. We can't look at D&I programs. We have to see what we need to do to make the workplace better for women. And there are some interesting, there's a Percona, which is a little DB company that we interviewed both the CEO and the CTO, who both happen to be women, talked about this. And they said that where their success came from was their co-founder, who was really, he really didn't think about, diversity and inclusion. He wasn't thinking about bringing women up through the ranks. What he was looking for were people who were really good at what they did, and didn't look at what their sex was, or how they referred to themselves, or their pronouns. He looked at who was going to do a good job, and that's how he started bringing women up in the company. So we need both of that. We need upper management to recognize that women have a lot to contribute in STEM and in technology in particular. And we also need women to see and understand that this is not a zero-sum game, and we need to help each other through the process.
Several years ago, about 10 years ago, when I was at USA Today, we had this project that looked at this topic. So there's an incredibly talented reporter who's still at the paper named Jessica Gwynn. And so she and I worked on this together. And we got, Jesse Jackson, for some reason, got involved in it. And we did a presentation at Stanford with representatives. This was really hard to pull off, but representatives from Google, Facebook, and Apple agreed to do this, as well as Twitter. And it was a very sensitive topic. But what was frustrating to me is that a lot of the things that we're talking about now, we were talking about back then. And the progress is glacial. I mean, there is progress, but it is glacial. I think mentorship, as Tracy said, is incredibly important, as well as education. But what was telling was it was, I believe, in hindsight, a checkbox initiative for some of these companies, because all of the chief diversity officers of those companies that were on that panel were gone within 18 months. And they were replaced. And I don't even know now if these companies, I'm sure these companies still have that title, but to me at the time, it felt a little bit like a show on the part of the tech companies because they're so dominated by white males.
It's performative. It's definitely performative.
It was. That's a good word. Yeah.
No. Tracy Bannon, I know you were involved early on this topic, including working on that show on Techstrong TV, but what is it about mentorship that doesn't seem to be happening among women in the field?
Mentorship happens. Let me cut to the chase. The problem is not mentorship. I'm over-mentored. We're over-mentored because mentoring has become the new mansplaining, nerd-splaining, woman-splaining to one another. So mentoring is actually a challenge. What we need to do is more sponsoring. Sponsorship is different than mentoring. Mentoring and sponsorship, have a them, but sponsorship means that I make an opportunity for you, that I believe in you and I make sure that you have what you need to succeed. And I'm there to catch you when you fall. Very different than the current mentoring programs, which couple people together and you can have lunch every so often. You talk about your careers. And was it helpful? Sure, I had mentors. And should we do away with mentoring? No. But we need to foot stomp on sponsorship. And I want to talk a little bit about a quality that I have found. So I have a podcast called Real Technologists. And the reason that it says Real Technologists started from a rant when I was asked to put my pronouns into my signature block. And I said, no, you're a leader. Well, it's okay, but I don't want to out myself. And I'm not first and foremost known as a woman technologist, a woman architect. I've been fighting for decades to be an architect, to be an engineer, right? To be a researcher. Now, is the same true for the youngins? Maybe not. But my rant was that, hey, I control my adjectives, I control my adverbs, I control it all. Let me control that all. And that's where real came from. But as I interview individuals, and it's all about getting to their origin stories, what helped them to be who they are, whether they have different gender identities, all kinds of different humans. So it's not specifically female. But one of the qualities was that they dared to say yes when something was scary. They dared to say yes when there was an opportunity afforded to them. And I think one of the things that we can really help all of the different diversity organizations with is to give people sponsorship, but also help them to say yes. Women in specific, as Tracy said, right, we have to help them at the earlier grades to stop saying no, right? There comes a point, and there have been studies about this, this is not just opinion, when you hit puberty and the brain starts to change a little bit, where girls will stop taking those chances, where they will throttle back from those things. So I believe we can really help, but what we can't do is stop talking about it. Someone said to me, boy, you've been dealing with women in technology. There have been the women's groups. Can we throttle back on it now that the younger generation is doing better? And I would say, well, hell no. We have to continue to talk about bringing the right people with the right skills to the table. And that expands us, right? That takes us past the women in technology. It takes us to humans. And yes, there is a dominant group right now, but we can get past that. So there, my rant over.
I really like the idea of a sponsorship as opposed to mentorship, because it really is. It's somebody who is reaching down and saying, I am going to sponsor you. We are going to make sure you're lifted up. And that is an area that women really need to work on.
John Willis, wait. I want to get John Willis in here on this because I know he's passionate on the subject. But I want to ask you this one question, John. We both know a lot of guys who look like us, and they have quiet biases, right? They have, and sometimes those biases, become less quiet after they had a couple of beers. But during the day,
we're still a pretty pathetic industry, and the Palo Alto is the sort of the visual part of the. I stand on stage, we all do, and you look in the room and you say, what the hell is going on here? I'll tell you this, white, old, you're not fat, I am, I'm kind of less fat than I was. White, old, fat, privileged men, we grew up in this real way. Now, I always try not to be a rude person, but you kind of don't know what you don't know. And this is the cliche part of me. DevOps helped me so much here because I got to meet younger people, younger women. And I remember one of the, all of a sudden I'm on the Bannon working. How can we get more women? In some of the earliest DevOps days, we went for diversity. We literally, tried to build, even with Gene, we really went strategic about how we're going to do this. We're not just going to go 50-50, but we're going to go out and find amazing, like the two Tracys, different people who can come in and be incredible day one valuable. But, and so I was like, okay, well, now I'm a good citizen. And then, a young woman, I could talk about the, what happened with, her name at Docker, which was just a terrible tragedy. You can take too long. But somebody came up to me and said, John, it's great that you're doing this. And every once in a while you're doing a talk about diversity. And he said, but can we just focus more on how to keep women in STEM? They're like, oh my God. Yeah. Okay, we're all again, old, sort of we've seen the light, white men, privileged white men, okay, but then we're not yelling at our peers. To your point, that silent, when you're in the bar and a couple of guys get a couple of drinks in them and start saying, I don't know why they care so much about he or she, and that's our time to
yes.
speak up and say, you know what, that's bullshit. And it's hard. you're having the, anyway, long story short, I mean, I
No, kudos to you, John. As another friend of mine, Dr. John Cuffold, calls it out on LinkedIn and in his other social feed. When there's a mantle, he calls them mantles, right? When you see a group of experts together and visually you're immediately caught by, wow, there's a homogenization that's going on there. So he's and it doesn't mean that those are not experts, but can't we look at other experts, right? Don't always go to your comfort zone. And I think that that's a message for all of us, is not always going to our comfort zone. I just always go to John Willis because he's in my comfort zone.
I think STEM is becoming unavoidable in this sense. And I was having this chat with my daughter, and she works in this fashion house and has stayed away from STEM her whole life, no interest. And we were talking, I was saying, so how's the economy? You worried about your job? She says, yeah, we're laying some people off. And, and I said, so are you concerned about that? And she said, no, not really. I'm the only one here who knows how the software works. So go figure.
Well, one last put, and then we're probably going to have to close this topic out, but I'm an advocate of STEAM over STEM.
Oh.
So the arts make a huge difference for STEM, right? Better at math if you expose children to music, for example. So there's a beauty that comes from STEAM, not just STEM. And that tends to merge those worlds that you were talking about there, Mike. It tends to merge across the aisle, so to speak.
It does. And AI is going to drive it further, because the people they're looking for to recruit for AI are all liberal arts people more so than they are hardcore.
Little bit.
Yeah.
I just want to tell one story real quick here. This is about Cloudflare. When Cloudflare was started by Michelle Zatlin, and can't think of her partner, maybe Matthew Prince. They came from Harvard. She was the technologist behind it. She created Cloudflare. She had thought about it for quite some time, worked on it through her college career. He was the sales pitch. He was good at selling. So the two of them marched themselves off to Silicon Valley to look for funding. And they got a big chance. But they took her partner to the side and said, we'll fund you as long as you get rid of the little girl.
Oh, wow.
So we have if you're an investor listening, don't pass up Cloudflare because there's a little girl in the room, because that little girl may have been the one who wrote the technology. and we recognize their biases, but you have to understand that you need to get past those biases, because there are other brilliant people solving really hard problems, not just Elon Musk and people who look like him.
Yeah, Tracy, that's interesting. You said that, because I've had five women who I know who started companies who told me the same type of situations, the same scenario when they were asking for funding, and they were met with the same type of answer, same type of attitude.
You have no idea what they say to women. I had one investor said,
I wish I could tell you what they said. Yeah,
but I
wish I could tell you what they said.
But, and I said, why couldn't you invest in me if you love my product? And they said, because what if your kid gets sick?
Oh, geez.
Yeah.
Oh,
and I said,
let's not go down this path.
Okay. I said, well, I'm so thankful that you believe I'm in childbearing years. And it was a very nice conversation. And I just hung up.
Here, right? You don't hear her. Now, recently, you're getting a little more noise about her, but I've been doing all this crazy research on the history of AI and neural networks, right? She is as important as LeCun, Hinton. I mean, because without what she did, you read her book, if she connected the dots, and you hear the Godfather, LeCun, you hear Hinton, you hear Bengio, every once in a while you'll see a little bit of a sort of slight of the godmother, so we continue to perpetuate this nonsense, and she is, in my, from my history of neural networks, she is equally as important as LeCun and Hinton, because she connects the dots between the two.
All right. I think we got to end this conversation here, but I would just end it with this one point. Regardless of race, creed, color, or gender, don't be an asshole. We'll be back in a minute. All right, folks. And then earlier this week, there was an all-day DevOps event. It's a virtual event. You can find references to it on devops.com. And the main theme was, once again, DevSecOps, not surprisingly. And this is not a topic that everybody's in love with. I'll be honest, it's one of those topics that we all need to talk about, but it doesn't drive the most amount of traffic on our sites because, well, a lot of folks just shy away from it, and it's painful is at the end of this. John Willis, I'm going to start with you here a little bit, but I know you were talking to Alan Chimel about this very issue also at an open text of a virtual event. And what is your sense of what's going on with DevSecOps? Because if I look at the Sonatype report, at least, everybody's still using the wrong version of software, and there's tons and tons of vulnerabilities, and it doesn't feel like we're making any progress. And then the next survey will come out and say, including some stuff that we've done on Techstrong research, suggesting that half the folks at least are doing the right thing, but I don't know if they're getting the right answers, or if it just means they're trying.
Yeah, shocker. People are writing and consuming more software. Holy mac, who would have thought? Mark Andreessen warned us in 2011, right? He said software is eating the world, right? And now it's eating the cloud. Like, put it to another whole layer. Just the consumability. It's I'm nuts. It's called Jevons paradox. The more abstractions you create, the more you use, right? But now at AI, it's even sort of like, now it's sort of steroid based, right? Like, because the generation of code and we can stay away from the efficacy of the code. But yeah, so the numbers, the Sonatype, bless their heart, they've been doing God's work for 10 years now. Those reports, I think, have been incredibly, the early years were amazing for us, especially when we were trying to build the DevSecOps narrative. Like, it was great to have this, incredible amount of data, and they owned Maven Central. Sonatype had Maven Central, so it was a great sort of grounding place. I think that I'm a big fan of what Sonatype has done for the 10 years. I think, I read the report recently, and recently as in the last day and a half, but, so the growth, the 150, all that stuff, right? But here's the one thing I was sort of disappointed at is that they didn't hone in on AI, and AI is like the real vector problem right now because the abstraction of all the code. If we think about all the problems, and I know Traci is the next, sort of both Tracy's are experts in this, but the dependency map I've always said is beyond human comprehension of just code, right? Like what goes on. You write 10 lines of code, it's could be 1 million lines of code with that 10 lines of code that you create. Right. And then therein lies all the dragons. Well, that just the game just up in 2.5, 3 orders of magnitude of complexity now with the abstraction and the code that's being built. So I just would have thought, like a little more drill in. And I know they have the data because, I've seen, Stephen give presentations at ETLS. Sort of some of the other reports now are doing a better job about supply chain and, for example, I think in a report they talked about an increase in PyPy and pip, the repository for Python. Of course, there's an increase there. Like, more people are writing Jupyter notebooks right now for AI models, and people who never coded before. And again, herein lies this abstraction problem because now we've got more code. At least the Java libraries were reasonably vetted. Capital One at one point had 20,000 Java developers. Right, NIST and all. There's a lot of work that looks at the hard job of figuring out where the dragons are on this code. But guess a place that hasn't been looked at is academia Python code, right? And it's now getting thrown into banks and retail insurance at a level. And so the real story about not is just that, pip libraries, the PyPy is now 80% increase. It's like the why and the impact of that. And then I think they should have honed in on some of the new vulnerabilities like hallucinations in code libraries or some of the interesting stuff Wiz is doing, like with Pickle, bytecode in model inference models, right? And escaping out. And the fact that there's a high increase in configuration, misconfiguration. That's not really misconfiguration, but it's configuration vulnerabilities. We saw this in cloud with Docker, Kubernetes, right? Again, I think a little bit of disappointment that because I kind of know a little bit of inside baseball that they do have a lot of this knowledge. I think it should have been blasted or at least referenced more significantly in this report at this time, because I think our CIOs, and I'll go one last thing and I'll turn over the mic, but I've been working on this Dear CIO narrative, like the CEOs are hiring, we wrote a sort of fictional story, CEOs are hiring chief AI officers. I think we talked about this on the show. The chief AI officers are told to stay away from the CISO, stay away from the CIO. They're bringing in Stanford. I've heard the other day that they're only hiring from Stanford and CMU. So they're bringing these kids, and when you talk to them, they're like, why are you guys going on about how hard it is to install Kubernetes? It was easy for me. And so they're building these stacks with Kubernetes and Kafka and Redis, and they don't know anything about hardening, and they don't do the research. They don't. So I call it shadow AI, right? Like shadow AI is going to be at least 3 orders more complex than shadow IT, and we're still cleaning up from shadow IT. So I would have liked to see Sonatype spend a little more time. I think, not that we have to compare Sonatype and JFrog, but JFrog's doing a much better job of exposing all these sort of macro level vulnerable opportunities.
Tracy Bannon, I know you were at a conference recently where some of this content came up. I mean, what's your take? Glass half full or half empty?
It depends on who you are and what your skill sets are, whether it's half empty or half full, quite frankly. So I agree with everything that John has said. There are orders of magnitude of people who don't understand how to operationalize the goodness, right? Data scientists are data scientists. They're not intended to create something that's production worthy. Quite frankly, that's why I spend a lot of time, why MITRE spends a lot of time with our data scientists to say, how do we operationalize this? What does assurance look like so that we can actually take it forward? The number of thought leadership that's made available by these folks is fantastic. But goodness gracious, what happens when you go from experiment, right, to fielded production? There's an entire life cycle that should be there. One of the things that we're trying to help folks with, and this just broadly, is to say, even when you're experimenting, unless it's just a one-off experiment on your desktop and you're the only person who's going to see it, everything needs to have a base level of maturity to it, a base level of hardening to it. Like, these are the fundamentals. John and I were both in Boca Raton. Actually, Techstrong and Alan brought us together. And even just working on some LLM libraries, we were just working on some Jupyter notebooks, we realized that we had some really poor practices right there in front of us in terms of having our keys embedded and our secrets. And thank heavens that Shannon Leitz raised her hand and said, hold on, peeps. Hold on. Look what you're doing.
It was great. It was great.
So the point there is that we need to be embracing of the data scientists. We need to be embracing of the folks who are on the AI side of the house, the mathematicians. We need to help them because they just don't know. They truly don't know. And it's not in their wheelhouse. So let's give them guardrails. On the other side of it, let's make sure that when we are consuming those things, that we're smart about it. We always were. We were smarter about it when it wasn't coming at us quite as fast. We were smarter about it. We evaluated. We didn't let our developers just bring down the latest package. In every organization I've ever worked with, we've had a 2-step hop. You could bring something into a sandbox and evaluate it, but to actually be part of our corporate repository that was leveraged, there was a second step, which was the evaluation and us approving it, and we hosted it. Right? We didn't let you just simply go down out to the great old internet and pull down what the latest and greatest was. So there are lots of different approaches to it, but where John is going is right. Whether you call it shadow or not, we got a whole lot of people doing a whole lot of stuff, and we need to make sure that they understand where the risk areas are and what are the small things that they can do to help make us all just a little bit safer.
Tracy Ragan, you have been on this show multiple times saying that DevOps is broken. And now we're talking about extending that very broken DevOps processes out to more junior developers using higher level abstraction tools that hide all these nuances that Tracy's talking about, so they don't even know they probably exist. So how is all this going to turn out?
Well, first of all, we're I always say DevOps is broken for many reasons. Most of our DevOps pipelines are built around monolith, not a decoupled architecture. And if you think about what we've done with decoupled is now instead of having one big statically linked set of binaries that get released out together, and we check we run static code analysis against all of them. We're doing it against every single container, and we hope that everybody does the same process, but many times they don't. And just because you have done static code analysis or scanning code at the point in time of the container build doesn't mean that there's not going to be a vulnerability found 5 minutes after you just did that. So this is a real-time problem. And many companies have used binary repositories. They use all of the tools to try to keep them safe, but we still are not winning the battle. And that's because our tools are just old. We're not making investment in this space any longer. I know that. I'm in this space and I'm knocking on investor doors and they want to see what we do with AI. And I'm like, I don't need AI to solve this problem. And part of this is when you have one vulnerability that could be now distributed across literally thousands of containers, what you need to know is what version of that vulnerability is the problem. It's not just every single, the package may be fine. It's the version of the package that's the problem. So you need to either put the older version in or upgrade to the new version where the patch is fixed. And they talk about that in that report, that it could be a year before somebody consumes the correct package. So a lot of this has to do with scripting. Things are, it's very obfuscated where this data is coming from. And now we have it in thousands of Russian dolls that's running as containers across our clusters. And in that Russian doll, you have a package, you have multiple components, and then you have on top of that what we would call the solution that's put inside a container. And every time we do that, we pull in those vulnerabilities. So we could have duplicate vulnerabilities across the entire Kubernetes cluster, and we can't find where it's running. So what do? We take a sawed-off shotgun, and we try to hit the target. We say, okay, we're just going to reinstall. Everybody's going to get a new version of this package the next time they build. And does it always happen? No, it doesn't. So it's a hard problem to solve. We need new tooling specific to this area. We need new, fresh ideas. And by the way, that might be coming from a woman.
Oh, my first question is, how do you say it? Is it Matryoshka dolls? So that was the Russian doll analogy. I think that's a beautiful one. A second thing that I'd like to get some opinions on is something that I was talking about with Mike earlier, and that is being at some different DevOps events recently. In addition to needing new tools, how do we re-energize the professionals? Because there is a certain exhaustion in our industry, in our field, right? We've got a ton of information that's coming at us, but the folks that I see at these different events, they're not necessarily the new in career. They're not younger. They are well established, and they're going there to get a little bit of, just a little bit of extra energy, or somebody that says, yep, you're right. You're going about this in the right way. So how do we take not just the tools, but how do we reinvigorate? Because we keep just hearing about just throw some AI on it, just sprinkle some AI on it. And if you've got challenges with your SDLC, sprinkling AI on it isn't immediately going to get rid of your friction, right? It isn't going to make your value stream any more effective. How do we help the humans right now in all of this?
All right, we only got a couple of minutes left, so I'm going to let John Willis answer that question because, you were at the start of this whole thing. So
I was going to duck out, man.
Man, that was aimed at you, Willis. That's for you, right? That's for you.
Maybe they got to go and put my cliche hat on. Like back to Tracy, the other Tracy's comment. Like, I agree with everything, and I've just been concerned about this, the sort of the complexity of it gets worse. But to my point earlier, now we have people who don't even know what they don't know. Yeah. When you look at an AI stack, when they mature away from notebooks to stacks, they're using Kafka, they're using Kubernetes, they're using all of these tools. So I've been saying to people, you think you've written an AI application, you've written 85% of what you've written is basically cloud native infrastructure. And so now it's like the now more than ever, maybe that's the dear CIO, let's scream for the top of our heads. Like, this is as bad as it is. It's going to get a lot worse when we have like HR groups bringing in Stanford kids to build co-pilots that think that, like, what's so hard about installing Kubernetes? I just hit a couple of buttons, right? And like maybe we need to scare everybody and get people what we do excited. You know, all right, I'll say one last thing. I know, Mike, we're going to shut this down, but the problem we have right now is I talked to a woman who is a chief AI officer of a large organization that are building stacks. And I asked her specifically, have you reviewed any of this with the CISO? And you could have heard a pin drop in the state where that headquarters was, because she knew she had to answer it. And the answer was no. Right? This should be, and so this fictional story that we wrote is where the CIO is savvy enough to go, I'm not going to let this happen. I'm going right into the chief AI's officer, and I'm going to plant myself there, and I'm going to make sure this doesn't happen. So, maybe, like, that's my sort of like tunnel vision answer. In general, I mean, I don't know. It's a hard problem because the people are less concerned about the hard. People want to do the easy, and the abstractions just keep getting better. So it keeps burying all the ugliness.
All right, folks, you heard it here. Hey, look, the professionals are scared, so maybe you should be too. All right. Hey, I want to thank everybody for being on the show. It was awesome. We ran a little bit long, but hey, no problem. We were having fun. Everybody else watching, please stay tuned for the next few episodes of the Techstrong TV broadcast for the day. And until then, we'll see you next time.